It's LaCroix, pure.
All right, you got the intro, Chris. Go ahead, bud.
Excuse me. You can include that. That's for the female listeners. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Smallie Talk podcast. This is your host, Chris Vaughn, and also joining the podcast tonight, gracing us with his absolute alpha dog presence. Joining us from Studio freaking B, Joshua, the Thunder Rod.
Is that it? Thunder Rod? Did we settle on that? Is that what it was?
It's settled. It's settled.
What do you think? I feel like I've had this mustache long enough. People aren't even mentioning anymore. So what's your thoughts on me?
I think you should be offended by the fact that nobody's even interested in it. Everyone's just accepting that you're a mustache guy, and that's
I guess I am, dude.
I mean, even Derek's still getting, and he's had a mustache now for like 3 years. He will still get comments like, "Nice mustache." I know what you're doing. Yours, everyone's just like, I don't know. He's stashed.
Yeah,
And yours is thick. It's thick as hell, for being frank.
It's trimmed too, dude. I just trimmed her up. Katie was telling me I look like so you wear a mustache and you're like, yeah, maybe I got Tom Selleck vibes, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Guess who she said that my mustache was starting to make me look like? Andy Reid.
Oh, what a sex icon he is, though. I mean, nobody runs an offense.
I was like, all right. Well, what do we got to do to change this? Do I need to She's like, well, it's because it's like growing like a walrus. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go trim that. And I went up to the bathroom and trimmed her up. So.
That's a rough comparison, dude. I mean, Andy Reid, great football coach, knows how to run an offense. Just absolutely a legend in the game, but not really the type of guy that you want your wife thinking of when you're absolutely sweating on top of her. I mean,
yeah, it was a rough comparison there, but
hell yeah, that's a bad one. That's I've gotten Dwight from The Office a few times, and that's kept me up late.
You don't like that. I've heard I've seen it firsthand. This is why I don't mention it.
It sucks.
People
Dwight
made some Dwight references, like, oh, Chris is Dwight. So I feel
what's worse is when they try and justify it because they see it bothers me, and they're like, no, it's the way you look and act. And I'm like, yeah, he's the worst character. He's
beats Battlestar Galactica, dude.
Yeah, exactly, dude. I mean, it's a rough comparison, but I will say if I had to take either Dwight or Andy Reid, I choose Dwight every day of the week. That's a bad one.
This is
we got. It's been a minute.
I know. What have you been?
I feel like I don't even know who the hell you are anymore, dude. You're off gallivanting, and I feel like your damn wife right now, dude. You're constantly gone. You don't ever call me to check in to see how I'm doing.
Please don't speak that into existence because this is already something that I struggle with. So, yeah, I haven't been. I did go fishing. I took Jeff Daly out. I don't know if you saw that.
I did.
I went on the tippy on Friday.
Damn, dude. I need to move. I need to move out of state, and that way, whenever maybe I'd get to fish with you every once in a while, I'll just breeze into town.
Well, it's kind of one of those things. Jeff is an interesting guy. He's my mortal enemy supposedly, but it's a little shtick he does on Instagram that he hates me.
True or false? He is about 4'9" tall. Is that true or?
He's a short boy. He's a little one. So yeah, we're this dude. His mustache goes about halfway down to his knees. So I mean,
he's a jolly little elf, isn't he?
he's a little dude. But yeah, we had a good time. They were, I would say, fish were definitively one of top water. It was one of those days where it was like, I threw topwater a little bit at first, but I was like, yeah, it's not usually something I'm like dedicated to all day because I think I can catch them other ways better. And dude, he was destroying me on it. He was just like kept throwing topwater, and I was like,
Nice.
all right, I guess this is what we're doing today. And yeah, I mean, I can't complain, but we were having trouble finding big fish. It's kind of one of those time of year, which we have a guest on. We're going to talk about. I'm sure he'll speak to some of the seasonal changes, but this is like kind of like no man's land for seasons. It's like late
Dog
summer.
days. Yeah.
Yeah, it's late summer. We got a false fall. We got like a real like quick cool down, and then
Yep.
we're back up in like the high 90s. It's kind of a weird time for a fish. I don't like I would say this is like one of my least favorite times because summertime they're super predictable. They're in spots. I think they're kind of thinking about going into some of those fall patterns, but it's obviously not fall yet. So it can be a
Yeah.
weird time. But
I had
yeah,
a pretty
man.
good
So
day on Flat Rock with my brother a couple weeks ago, or I got that was last weekend.
did you take the
But
raft out?
I did. Yeah, it was great,
Yeah, I
man. We had
wasn't
a
sure
great.
where you went. I saw some pictures of you posing with fish seductively, so I wasn't sure. So
Those were
um,
candid, dude. Those were completely candid photos.
yeah.
No, it was great, but I gotta say, you and Jeff on the boat together with tubers around that's a call to the police for suspicious prowlers just waiting to
Dude,
happen.
they gave us beers. It was a bunch of ladies
Yeah, to
floating
stay
in a
away. Go get
yeah,
take these beers, Cretans. Take these
they were
beers,
all like
Cretans. Stay
they
away.
were they were all like in their mid to late 30s, and I was like, aren't you ladies supposed to be in school right now? And they were
That
eating
is
that up, dude.
that is
They
so
were loving
gross.
that.
That's that's the creepiest thing you could have said. All right,
Jeff
well
was
let's
like,
get let's
elementary school or high school? What are you talking about
oh
there?
gross. Oh, that is so
Yeah.
that's something
Um,
else.
yeah, we got a guest. Before I did want to mention I am signed up to fish tournament here it's next week. I'm practicing next week. I'm teammates with Jeff Little. So it's Drew's kayak adventure series
Power
on the
team.
Wisconsin River. So I think Drew's supposed to come on and do a little podcast before that starts. So we'll pump that up a little bit. But if you're not signed up, get signed up. Kayak Adventure Series on the Wisconsin River. We're going to go tear it up there in Sauk City, Wisconsin. So,
Nice. That'll be
our
fun.
guest, though, dude, this guy has been, I first kind of noticed him from a tactical bassin post where I'd seen this guy around,
Mhm.
but he really caught my attention when he posted I want to say 9-pound, 4-ounce smallmouth he caught. Um, and anytime anything breaks 9, dude, like it's our feelers go up, so,
I mean,
so
try to sound less gay when you describe. I s- so I first noticed this guy on the internet, and and then I saw him
yeah.
some other
Mm.
places, and
Anyways, let's bring him on. With that said,
Cobi
I'm,
Cobi Pellerito. Is that it?
what's up, Kobe? How's it going, brother?
What's going on, gentlemen? Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you for the nice introduction. I appreciate that flair on my last name. That was good.
You're welcome. And that was all.
Like
That was
that.
all. That was all honor and respect in that. So I hope you appreciated that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, obviously. Of course. Yeah. Of course.
So
Nothing but.
obviously we brought you on to talk specifics about GPS coordinates. We're going to talk specifics about spots. No, we want to
On the spot. No general
yeah, we're
areas. Just,
no ledges. We want to hear we want to hear specific ledges on boulders that we should be
yeah.
looking for.
Yeah. The
No,
tree,
man,
the rock. Yeah. Nothing less.
yeah, exactly. You travel 3 nautical miles from no. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
We're this is a different you have a different type of you're kind of a big lake guy. I think it's fair to say
Yes, sir.
Great Lakes guy, which is
Absolutely.
interesting to me. I've done a few trips. I've done Travers Bay, Little Sturgeon, Sturgeon Bay, some I've done some great in Lake St. Clair and stuff like that. So I'm a little, I'm getting into it. I'm dipping. I'm just putting the tips in, at this point, just trying to just
Just the tips.
testing the water. And I got to say, I like it. It's a lot of
Absolutely.
fun.
Yeah. It
So
is. It is, man. It can be brutal. Is my internet working for you guys? I don't know why my phone's blowing up. I'm sorry.
you kind of broke up
My
there
internet
for a
working for you guys?
second.
Can you hear me all right?
We got you now. Yeah, we got you now.
we got you.
Okay. I think it should be good. The Great Lakes can be it's a two-edged sword, right? It can be so much fun when it works out and so great when it's right, but it's like Mother Nature can beat you up in a hurry. And that's an element that makes it, so great when it does line up, because you have all those days of getting pounded through the waves and dealing with all that stuff. And then when it does line up and it's a beautiful, calm night, you're like, wow, why can't it be like this all the time? It's like, you just really appreciate those days. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess one of the basic questions that I've got, which Josh will have some more specific questions, I'm sure, but like from it's kind of a weird thing. Like, we're river guys. I have like an aluminum 1860 jet, with like a, tunnel hole and that kind of stuff. And it's a mod V. So like, I feel it's a bit of a square peg in a round hole at times, especially when you get out on the open water. But like from a like a boat perspective, like what type of rig are you running to like go into the open water on the Great Lakes?
Yeah, so I have it's a 21-foot Champion 210 Elite. So those of you guys that might be familiar with like those old school Champion bass boats, they kind of have a cult following. So this boat was discontinued in like the early 2000s. 2008 I think is one of the last years they made the model that I have in particular. But it is obviously like a walleye style boat would be more ideal if you're just exclusively fishing the big water, just because the deeper hull and the waves. But so I've got a 21-footer. It handles really well in the big gnarly stuff. As far as bass boat hulls go, it allows for the longer distance, really helps, gapping waves. When you're covering distances, you'll find really quickly, like, I used to have just a 17-footer, and you'll find really quickly how inadequate it is at skipping wave gaps. You get a lot more spray and a lot more spoon and waves, when you have that little bit less of a hull that can kind of get across that distance. And so having that length overall, it goes a long ways. And just for the comfort of the ride, keeping you dry on a day that you don't need to be wet, because you get wet way too often when you're out there. So,
and I mean, most of the time the water temperature is like high 50s, right? I mean,
we peaked this summer. Yeah, we peaked this summer at like 72, and that was kind of exceptional because of how warm of a summer we had. But you guys, I don't know if you guys saw recently, I mean, we had those couple cold nights, and I saw some readings from the buoys that had gone from 72 to 43 in 2 days. So from August 17th to the 19th, it went from 72 to 43. And granted, part of that is, the currents and lake flipping and stuff, bringing in water from the deep. But I mean, that's a huge swing, and it's August still, and again, it was 90 today. So it's right back up there again. But that little bit of coldness and the wind and stuff kind of stirs things around. It can be a very, what's the best word? Like sporadic game,
Dynamic.
chasing temperatures or weather conditions, out there. Yes, that's a better word. That's a much better word. Yes, it's a very dynamic game. Absolutely.
Dude, that's go ahead, Josh.
And I was going to say, Chris jumped right into it. I honestly, dude, I don't know much about you, and I'm sure our audience doesn't. I kind of saw, I guess my take was like, this dude's like a legit trophy smallmouth guy, which we freaking love. Like, we've had a handful of those guys on there. Is that a fair description? And if you could just give us a little bit of just like background on you, how you got into fishing, and what kind of fishing you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good, before we get nerding out on Great Lakes stuff, I can start telling you who I am.
Fine. Fine. If that's what if you want to learn who this person is, fine. That's fine. I was more interested in the boat.
Yeah.
But fine.
Whatever. No, so all right, so I'm Cobi Pellerito. As you may have seen, he did a much better pronunciation of my last name earlier. I am a full-time photographer and media guy in the fishing industry. So I do photo, video work within the bass fishing space, a little bit of social media management, content creation, kind of many hats within that realm. My whole world has been centered around catching fish, catching bass my whole life. it has been something that, has kind of guided my path through college as early as, quitting sports in high school because they cut into fishing season, things like that. So it's really guided who I am, ever since that, from a very young age, to the point where I am now, where my season and my, year, my time of year, certain windows, my wife just knows, that I'm going to be focused on being on the water. So as with everything, my fishing has kind of grown and evolved, and the past, my whole adult life has been really centered on just diving into smallmouth. We all love smallmouth. They're such a cool fish. They're an addictive fish. And living in a place with the Great Lakes, we have so many Great Lakes up here in the north. We're so fortunate with that. I have kind of just dove into that head first, and it has consumed me, to put it lightly. And it has become something that's what I think about all the time. It's what I focus on. It's what I'm always looking forward to, and trying to understand and learn more, because it is such a dynamic game. And so, yeah, I focus. I love just catching smallmouth in general, period. But I do very much so place emphasis on targeting trophy smallmouth, and a double-digit smallmouth is the dream goal, which we'll talk a little more about later when we talk about the other fish. So, yeah, that's very much so what I do.
Cool, man. Yeah, like I explained a little bit to you what we are all about, and our double-digit smallmouth. If you haven't seen this kind of Quest for 23 thing around, that's kind of our. So we started that together. Gosh, it's been about a decade ago now. And
cool.
yeah,
some
ours
of us
is
have gotten closer than others to finishing.
Yeah. So ours is, our goal is like a 23-inch river smallmouth. That's like our sort of double digit, which, it's not going to be a double digit in a river, but that would, if you catch a 10-pounder, it's probably going to be 23 plus,
Yeah.
So yeah.
But still,
Yeah. So, you did catch that 9 that I mentioned. Which is
yes,
what
sir.
kind of, put you on the map for us. I mean, I'd followed you for a while, so like I had seen pictures and stuff like that. But there's as a photographer, you probably know, like, a lot of guys post fish that look big that you're like, I don't know, like, and
absolutely.
then when people drop stats like that, where you're like, okay, I'm a fish guy, I respect it. Like, I know, you recognize, game recognizes game. That's kind of like how I say it. And, when I saw that 9-pounder, I was like, that's special. I think I've seen 3. So you'd be the third one in probably the last 3 years that I've seen somebody like actually like verifiably catch that was over that. How long was that fish?
She was, hold on, my brain's all fuzzy here. She was 23. I think she was 23 on the dot. She might have been 23 and an eighth. I'm all scattered here. Number, but yeah, she was just over that legendary 23 mark. Yeah, so she was 23 inches by 18 inches around. And she was by far. Dude, she was crazy thick. Yeah, it's a special fish, and I understand what you mean completely, and that's why, something I'd always do when I post my fish on socials, I always give dimensions, like with each photo, because it's like so many people are like, yeah, I caught a big one today, but they give you no context to like how big it is or no, and so I'm like, well, you can't trust everything you see on the internet, right? So I try to make it, apparent that it's as much so has to be truthful to myself, for myself, as it is to be, honest with everyone else, so very much so. All the scales I use are IGFA certified, everything's, measured out. I try to keep it all prim and proper, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's jeez. That's
something.
That's quite the threshold. Have you had anything else knocking on the door of 9 pounds? Like, was that kind of something that you danced around, until this, and then you broke it, and or was this like a breakout fish?
It was a big fish. So I caught 2 over 8 last year. I've been kind of, slowly creeping further in the size category, right? So I've been dialing in some things, and I had 2 over 8 last year, including my biggest at the time was an 8.2. And then this spring, or this, early this year, was when I caught an 8.1 earlier in the year. So it was my third 8-pounder. So I was like, sweet, I almost got another PB. And then then that 9 was just about a week later, a couple days later. And then actually another fish that I haven't shared publicly yet, but I caught an 8-12 the following day. So that was another one that was real close, but that was after that 9-3. So that's the only one that I have in that window, in that realm. But yeah, very, very close. It's a whole different category of emotions when you see a fish that size. It's a whole different. It's hard to describe. I don't know if you guys saw, I did a little piece with Megabass. I work really closely with Megabass America. I have since I was like 17. And
nice.
I told Pete Robbins was the guy that wrote the article. And I told Pete on the phone, I'm like, Pete, when I netted the fish, all I had to do was net the fish, and I bend down and I look at her, and I just was like, just instantly flush with emotions, like all choked up. I'm all like, because there's just so much that has been centered into catching a fish like that for me personally.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to fruition, you can just see, like, normally, I don't want this to sound crazy, like when you catch a big one, it's hard to tell like specific differences in size, right? But it's a 6.5 or 6 3/4, 7 pounder. But when you get one that
Josh and I have that problem all the time. I mean, the 6
I didn't want it to sound jaded. I don't want to come across like that.
I mean, 6 is 6.5. Doesn't matter. It's like, come on, man.
I don't want it to come across like that, please. That just meant like the difference in the caliber. It's like it's a really cool thing.
9's a unicorn, dude. That's that's wild.
It really is.
I mean, I can't even fathom it, really. I mean, I've touched a few 6s before, and and it's a fish that's 50% bigger than that. I mean, that's wild to think about. It's 50% bigger than the fish I had and I felt like there's no capacity for growth in this fish. Like, it's ballooning out of its body.
You're like, where do they put it?
What do you? So I want to hear the story. I want to hear the story of this fish, but I also am curious. Like, did that fish have room to grow? Like, did you catch it at was this a fish where you like caught it and you're like, this could be 10 at the right time of the year?
Yeah. So this fish, up until that fish, all the other fish that I had been catching were just packed full, loaded. You know how pre-spawn smallmouth can be. They're loaded to the gill. Their bellies are all nice and full. This one was extremely healthy, not a blemish on her, which made me think she's a slightly younger fish, which is really cool.
Crazy.
But she also didn't have, like, she was big around, but she wasn't like, she didn't have like the gut, like for example, my 8-2 that I caught the year previous in the springtime was 17 and a half or 17 inches around, right? So only an inch difference in girth, but a pound difference. So if that tells you how wide that 8-pounder was, she was just like, just wide as can be, like loaded. But the other fish was an inch longer and only an inch wider in girth, but that's all it took to gain a whole nother pound, So I very much so. I don't know if it's because it's an older fish or a bigger fish. She doesn't have as much egg weight, right? She doesn't put on as much. You hear that they talk about how they don't quite gain as much in their older years.
Or
they're
don't
not as many eggs.
Yeah, they're kind of past
their prime. Yeah. It could be that. It could have been why she wasn't, or I could have just missed her. She could have dumped some eggs and then I caught her on the way back out. You know what I mean? So it very well could have been, you give her another 3/4 pounds of eggs, which is easily attainable for some of those, something that big. It's frightening to think about how much more it could fit. You know what I mean? But it's cool.
kind of crazy, man. I mean, those fish, like, I caught my personal best this. We fish in the winter a lot. It was this February. Was it February, Chris? I think it was.
It was cold. I know that.
Yeah, it was very cold. But it was 22 1/4, and that it weighed 5.66. But river fish, not really fair to compare.
It's a different game. But, totally different game.
Yeah, I mean, but it was.
We could compare them.
It was beat up though, dude. Like, this fish is it was like, it was missing parts of its dorsal fin. Like, it was like, this is an old fish. So that's crazy that was pristine. That that fish, could possibly still be caught a couple more times. And get bigger. That's nuts, dude.
It's nuts, isn't it? Yeah.
It's
crazy to think about.
Do you feel like the fishery that you're in, like that's the window of time that you have the best opportunity to smoke a 10-pounder? Is that like pre-spawn. I'm guessing that's like May, like late May, mid-May for you guys is like pre-spawn time frame.
Yeah, usually it is. So typically, it used to be that I would run into more of my larger fish in the fall time. But it seems to be the last couple of years as I've kind of dialed things in that those fish in the pre-spawn are really just that much heavier than they are even in fall. So like even when they're eating, the bait fish weight, they have all that bait fish or crawfish weight or gobies, whatever it might be. Even with all that you see them have in the fall, I still think that egg weight in the spring really helps put them at their maximum capacity. Like that's the fattest basically they're going to be all year because they're eating, they're getting ready to come up and spawn. They know it's going to be a stressful period. So they're eating ahead of time and they have fully developed roe, which adds, I'm not a biologist, but it adds a decent bit to each fish. As you guys probably know when you see them, they're full, they've got an extended stomach. And
say that last part again. I'm going to pretend like your internet broke up and I didn't understand you, but I don't think I understand the terminology that you just used. You said they've got fully developed what?
Roe, egg roe.
Roe.
Like egg.
Okay, I got it. I actually didn't hear you. Yeah. So, okay. No, well, okay. There you go. I thought you just used some very cool technical bass jargon that I didn't know about, but you're just talking sushi, baby.
I'm not that high tech.
Do you ever eat
you like good food? I'm sure, right?
No. So,
absolutely not. No.
So no. I did have a kind of a thought when you were describing your boat. And kind of, have you ever been caught out in like a truly sketchy Great Lakes storm where you're like miles from shore, like all of a sudden you're like sketched out?
Yeah. That's we could do wave stories a lot of times. So the nice part is now, like with all the technology and stuff we have, we've got buoys all over the Great Lakes that give, can read active predictions, live time predictions. I live by like the NOAA forecast. NOAA does like a 3 times a day. They update like a, little forecast. And that's the most accurate by far. You can use all those wind finder apps and stuff. And there's some of them are good, some of them not so much. But I check that NOAA one like 10 times a day. You know what I mean? Like, cause you got it, cause it changes and they change it constantly. Even with that, there's still times when, like the fall is always windy up here. Like even the nicest days, like I use the example, a couple of years ago when I was just getting out of college, I could have fished almost any day in November, right? I had a loose schedule. I had lots of time. I think I was able to get out like a total of like, maybe 2 days because it was just so windy, and so it's always brutal. So you take little windows, especially on some of these bigger fisheries up here, you take a little window, right? Like you might see, okay, Thursday morning, I have from daylight until noon before that wind kicks up, right? So I've got a little window that I can run. And a lot of the areas that I target and I catch a lot of my bigger fish are very remote or hard to get to. For example, one of them, the story I'll tell you was it's about a 13 to 15 mile run, depending on what part of the reef or, that I'm setting up on from the nearest ramp. So when you're out there and that water's, 42 degrees, right? It is a whole different feeling because there's no other boats out there with you, right? So like if something goes wrong, it's all on you. And so this particular day, I ran out to this reef, right? I ran, 13 and a half miles, had an awesome time. Had a little limited window, where we caught maybe half a dozen fish, but they were all big ones, all good, healthy, beautiful fish. It's cold, so you're really having to work to get them to bite. And as we're there, that wind is kind of picking, and we're like, we're still catching them. So you don't want to leave because you can see them down there with your eyes, and you don't want to leave. And you're like, all right, we gotta go because it's picking up and it's building. You're taking it over the bow, but that's normal. It's just part of it. And then you get going, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna have to come out in here, and where it kind of gets deeper, it opens up and it makes like this trench with the funnel. The way the wind kind of comes through, the waves just get bigger there for whatever reason. I don't know the science behind it, but I remember, getting up on pad and running the first mile or two and being like, this is dumb. We should have left way sooner than this. And we get into this section and the wind is just picking up and howling so much that I remember being, this boat's a heavy fiberglass boat, right? So it weighs a couple thousand pounds. And I remember I'm on pad and I'm running and I remember the waves cresting underneath me. So I joke that we're surfing, we're in the boat, you're in the trough. So I'm going to run to shore and then I'm going to hug the shore and run back down to the ramp. And I remember being up like running up on top, and these waves would crest underneath me and just put my boat down. I remember like being lifted and just dropped, and they're so big that they're just like rolling you over. It's hard to describe it, but it's a very wet experience. You got your hood all buttoned down. You're trying to like keep all, dry, and it's the water's so cold that you're just like trying to just keep going, and your glasses, you're trying to wipe your glasses. And that particular day, it took me about, 20 minutes to get out to the spot, right? It took me almost 2 hours to get back to the ramp, just running. So that's 2 hours of travel time. So that particular day was one of the worst ones that I've been in. I normally don't push it. I'm not a tournament guy, so I don't have to be out there in bad conditions. You know what I mean? Like if it's gnarly, have an old boat, I don't get a new boat every year. I can't afford to break it all the time, so I have to be choosy. But yeah, it's a gnarly game when it's out there and the water's cold.
I think if you haven't spent like a lot of time, and I haven't spent a ton of time on the Great Lakes, but I mean, like I said, I fished Huron, I fished like Alpena, Michigan. I fished up there. I fished, and that's like, if you haven't spent a lot of time on the Great Lakes, like there are shipwrecks everywhere, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shipwrecks. So like in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, if like the weather up here can wreck like a legitimate seafaring vessel, like eventually, like if you're a bass guy and you're just not paying attention, you could get like really messed up out here. Like the waves are legit, like big chop, that stuff that you like if you're like on a regular lake, like you get white caps and you take water over the bow and stuff like that, but nothing like what you see on like I mean, this is as close to like you're essentially ocean fishing for bass is kind of what you're doing to a certain
The only peace of mind is you won't get eaten by a shark if you do fall over. It's the only it's the only pease of mind you have.
You're just gonna freeze to death in 42-degree water.
Yeah, you'll just freeze. Yeah, exactly. It's just the dangers. The most dangerous part of it is in the spring and the fall is it can happen so quickly. Like a mistake. You can be running fine, and if you mistime a wave and you take one, right? If you don't have good enough bilge pumps to get that water out quick enough that you can get back up, you're going to have another one and another one. And before you know it, you can't get back on pad. Those motors can only handle, I have a 250 on mine, which is big, and excessive, a lot of power. But even with that big of a motor, if you fill that, the center console area with water, you're going to have a really hard time getting that thing up on pad, in order to keep going and keep from fully submerging yourself. It's a very fine line, between stupid and, I'm so glad I went out here, because you catch that big, beautiful fish. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's different too, because like, I feel like, bass fishing is of course super popular. And I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of bass fishermen that do the Great Lakes. Like there are a lot of bass fishermen that do the Great Lakes, but like I've been out there and like, it is a fraction of the amount of boats out there, right? Like most of them are fishing, 120 feet of water for lake trout and salmon and stuff like that. And you'll see like 3 bass boats all day kind of thing. And that's even like in spots where there's a lot of boats, or whatever. So I feel like, and those setups are completely different. They're not really bass boat style, whatever. I feel like it's, there is an element of sketchiness to like running 15 miles, in an open water with like such highly volatile weather conditions. And like, you don't have a radio like you would in like a seafaring vessel. You don't have, it's not like some super deep V boat that can handle like big chop and that kind of stuff. So you really just have to like have your head on a swivel. Like you said, pay attention to the weather apps, the NOAA stuff, and like, pick your windows, right? I mean, that's like a huge safety thing, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You know,
sounds like fun, dude. I'm not taking the jet.
Sound like fun.
No way.
Well, I mean, what we do is sketchy for another reason. Like we run in 4 inches of water, dodging boulders. I mean, Josh, he's thrown friends out of the boat. People that he considers to be dear friends have gotten tossed out of the boat. We know professional athletes that have tried and gotten skipped across the water like stones. So we have a good friend that's dislocated his shoulder a couple of times. Like it's sketchy for a different reason, but I feel like I mean, I feel like that's kind of something that people just kind of gloss over as like, but the Great Lakes, dude, they're no joke.
I don't.
Stuff.
Yeah, I have nothing but respect for that. Well, I'm curious. Okay, so do you fish? At what point in the year does the Great Lakes become like too cold to fish? Are you like fishing into the winter, or do you kind of stop once the water temperature drops so
We
far?
Yeah, so you can catch them almost until things ice up. You can totally catch them, right up till ice up in certain portions, certain regions. Obviously accessibility becomes an issue because as we start getting into, early December, the ramps and a lot of the ramp bays start to freeze up
Ice
because
up, yeah.
oftentimes the ramps are kind of protected, so they'll ice up before you can really. So the main lake might be open, but the ramp bay might be too thick that you can't really break through it, to get out to it. So usually historically, up here, I'm not able to make it out onto the big water, past like mid-December, early to mid-December. That's usually
Mm.
about the end of my season up here, just because of the weather, because of the, dangers of the temperatures. And the fish do become, unless you have certain regions, there's certain areas where you can catch them all the way until it's frozen. The particular places that I live by, it's more difficult to access those, so they're more of a, there's more of a risk associated with it. So that's another element. And then dragging your boat through all the salty roads and stuff when at that time of year, if you want to go drive to where the fish are accessible, you got to get salt all over your stuff and rinse it off like a saltwater boat. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
So
through March, like mid-March, end of March is like when like it thaws or what do you,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you
Yeah.
typically see?
Usually on a normal year, we can get out late March, early April. It depends on the winter. This year, things were opened back up, and accessible by, I think, like second week of March, third week of March.
Nice.
And then, but it's still, you're still dodging ice flows and stuff like that. For example, I had a couple days this where I had to like weave through ice chunks to get to the section that I wanted to fish. And it's just skim ice. I'm not trying to sound like I'm dodging icebergs like Titanic or anything, but
No, it's
you're
deadly
idling around ice
as
chunks.
sketch, dude. It's
Yeah,
it's deadly
exactly.
as
I'm wearing a
sketch.
yellow
I've
suit,
seen
you know
it.
what I mean?
You're out
Yeah.
there too. You're just
No,
crap man, dude.
Exactly. Pulling cages, casting for smallmouth. And
So-
so you're idling through it, and then the wind shifts, and they're like blowing back at you, and you're like hoping that the ice breaks up before it gets to where you're fishing, so you can keep casting. It's a weird dynamic, man.
That's fun.
So how in the pre-spawn when we were kind of talking about you catching that fish, which you can kind of lead into this and talk about that fish specifically. But what's your depth? What kind of depth are you fishing at that time of the year?
That's a great question. I think one that so early ice out. I think those fish are they've kind of shifted from wintering areas and they're staging just adjacent to the zones that they eventually will spawn in, right? So say you have this nice pocket where all the fish like to spawn. Out in front of that, there's going to be a transition zone. Oftentimes, I find they like those areas that are a quicker transition, right? They'll be like a quicker slope. So those fish will hold just adjacent to that. So there'll be limited windows where you can catch them in 15 to 20. But I find a lot of those fish, man, if you get a good couple sunny days, a lot of those fish will pull up quicker than a lot of people think. And you'll find them hanging out in, 4 to 10 foot of water, almost within the first week. Water temps might still be 34, 36, and those fish will already be, if it's sunny, they like that sun, you're right, because they're coming up to chill and they like to soak it up. Those fish will come right up and they'll sit adjacent to, different types of cover, and utilize that as like a warming thing. Some people say that like the wood and the rocks holds more heat. I don't know if I've never gone down there and felt it personally, so I don't know if it does, but they often will go sit next to something, or stage next to something, like really early, like I said. So the 4 to 10 foot is the zone that I look at within the first couple of weeks, of season opening up, at least up here.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you just kind of like, say you pull up on your spot, you just kind of, but if you bump one shallow, you just start being like, okay, I'm going to start picking around at the shallow stuff and see what's out here kind of thing. I mean, because you can see, for those of you who haven't fished the Great Lakes, like I mean, anything less than 10 feet of water, it's like a swimming pool. I mean, you can see as clear as day. If you're bumping fish in 13 foot of water, you can see it, you know, that, hey, I just bumped a fish. I mean, is that kind of, are you just relying on your sort of senses for that? Or do you just kind of go to historical spots, or what do you sort of, what's your initial strategy like for that?
Yeah, so usually, like you said, it very much so is eyes, you know, using your eyes. You know, if I get a good sunny day, like I'm often looking for that early time of year, I'm just going to go look for them and see if I can see them. You know, I love catching fish that I can see cruising and chasing, you know, running around and stuff like that. You know, oftentimes it'll be like, I graphed this stretch, you know, last year or this, you know, and so I know there's a couple pieces of wood or there's a couple boulders or something. There's a clay spot that they'll sit on, you know, and so I know where the spot is and I'll have a waypoint that I'm going to, and I might go graph it with side imaging first and go see if I see them. Oftentimes they're grouped up real good in the early spring, so you'll see a bunch of them sitting there on the mud or sitting on the structure if it's deeper that you can't see, right? If you can't see it visually, you know, usually that's what I'll do. I'll look for it with the electronics and then I'll go cast at that waypoint. So oftentimes it's looking at a pinpoint spot. And then, you know, you can kind of expand, you know, if you have a good sunny day and you can see, I'll just go start running new stuff. You know, once I've kind of fished through some of them, you'll start running new stuff and see, to get a gauge, you'll get a feel pretty quickly what depth they're at or what position they're at, you know, in that particular region of the Great Lakes right there.
Gotcha. Cool. Tell us about that 9-pounder, dude. Tell us how did that, what was that day like? Tell us, like, I mean, you don't have to tell us the lure, but if you want to tell us the lure,
totally.
Give us the down and dirty.
Your friends at Megabass are going to be pissed at you if you don't tell us the lure. So,
yeah, thankfully they're pretty good about that stuff. Yeah, so it was really cool. It was a little window where, you know, things were kind of trending in the right direction weather-wise, right? We had a good warming trend. It was a little later on than, you know, some of the prime stuff, but I knew it was still a good chance. You know, we had a good moon phase coming, which is a big thing for some of those really big fish. And so I started out, you know, kind of just going out again, same kind of thing, just going out and looking. I went and checked a big shallow stretch, and I caught a real good one to start the day up shallow. I had a 612 to start the day, and I was like, awesome, you know, like this is a great, you know, a days of success, right? You know, to check it off, and then you're kind of getting a feel for. I'm like, okay, I bebopped around and I was checked a bunch of other stuff, and I had this other stretch that I had fished in years past, but I hadn't been to it yet this year, and I'm like, I'm gonna go check that one. I'd caught a couple males since that 612, but it was, you know, afternoon or evening by this point, and my wife and little one were supposed to come out and join me because it had been sunny, but it kind of clouded up and it got kind of windy, and they're like, oh, we'll just stay back this time, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I ran down to the stretch, and normally it's a stretch that I fish visually because you can see it. You know, it's a transition from rock to sand, and it's a little depth change. They kind of use it as like a highway to get back into, you know, a vicinity as they end up spawning in. And so I'm just fishing along this little break line. It's kind of cloudy. I can't even hardly see the line. I had turned my electronics off because I kind of just was going stealthy, and I didn't really want to have anything going or pinging up there. I'm kind of big on being extra quiet, you know, around those real big fish. And so I had fished through 3/4 of this edge and hadn't seen a fish or hadn't gotten a bite. And I'm fishing are you guys familiar with the Megabass Dark Sleeper? It's that little like bottom dwelling. Yeah, it's that little like bottom dwelling swim bait. Dude, that little thing is one of my favorites for early pre-spawn fish, especially in the Great Lakes, you know, because it mimics Cobi's. It looks like a swim bait. You know, you can cover water with it. You can crawl it on bottom. It's everything, right? Like if you're just trying to chuck and wind something and you don't, like in this case, I didn't know if there were fish there. I'm just fishing it. That's one of my favorite baits. So I'm creeping that bait along, right? I'm just scooting it along and I'm rocking, you know, it's getting wavy because it had kind of picked up and got kind of bumpy. And I just get cracked, like just the hardest bite. I remember watching my fluorocarbon just go like doing, like just like jump. And I wind down and I set and it just was like nothing. Like I had for a second, it was nothing. I was like, dang it. That felt like a really good bite. Like just, there's something, it was so hard that it was just like I can't really describe it. It was just crushed it. And so I just I'm like, okay, I got to try, you know, I keep scooting it, right? I don't want to like reel it away from her in case she's still watching it. I'm so punch it, or if there's a couple of them sitting there, and I keep scooting it, and I see my line jump again, boing, but this time I just waited and nothing happened. It didn't move, and so I scoot it 2 more times, and at this point it's probably 50 feet from the boat. So it had gotten, about halfway back from my cast, and I see it jump again, and I wind, and it's tight. And so I wind back and I crack it to the side, just a side hook set sweep. And it just absolutely folds my rod over, just loads it right up. Like it's just, I've caught a lot of big fish on that rod, and it hadn't done anything like that before. And she comes up, she's in such shallow water, she has nowhere to go but up, right? So she just comes up and just can't get out, but she's like just wallering across the surface, like, almost like a tarpon tail walk, but it's a big smallmouth, it's overweight tail walk. And she just is just throwing water everywhere. And you're never thinking like, oh, it's fine. Like, it's just not a number that comes in your head, right? It's just not. I'm like, oh, that might be a 7. Like that's a 7. She's a big one. And so she's tail walking, she's jumping, goes back down again. And I survived the first couple jumps. Like, she didn't get off first couple jumps. I'm like, okay, I should have her pinned good enough, right? And she gets by the boat side, and she rips to the back to the right, I just can't even do anything. Like, I'm not able, normally I can like steer them, I get the net in, I can she's just like, I'm just holding on and trying to like keep my drag loose enough, make sure everything's good. I didn't want her to get any like slack or anything. So I'm just trying my hardest, because she's going back and forth, and
you're alone.
Comes up boat side. Yes, I'm solo. Yeah, I fish below 99% of the time. Yeah. So I'm alone. Okay. So I have the net. I'm on my knees at this point. I have the net right next to me, right? And I pull the rod back, and I'm like stretching. I scoop her. I get her in the net, and it's just like, as soon as I bend over because I have a thing. I always keep them boat side in the net, like when I catch these big ones, just so they can breathe, stay in the water, whatever. So as soon as I reach down, I don't even move her. I just lip her, and I unhook the bait, and I'm just like, dude, this thing's just huge. And that's when I told you about earlier. I just was instantly all choked up, all emotional. I've never gotten that way with a fish before, but I think when everything I've worked so hard to find one like that. And I know a lot of people say that, but like my whole adult life has been centered on that, right? And so it was really, really special to see one of that caliber, in person, and you could just tell she was just so much bigger than anything I have caught, which is really cool. So I FaceTime my wife, because I normally do, like if I have a big one, I'll call her and show the little one and stuff. And I'm like all choked up when she answers, and she's like, "Are you okay? Like, did you get in an accident?" I'm like, all I can say is like, I caught her. And she's like, what? Let me see. And so I show her the phone. I'm like, I want you guys to stay on. And I set the phone down, and I try to weigh it, and it's bouncing between, like 814 and 912 or something like that. Cause I was out in the waves, I'm swaying around, and I'm like, I gotta get a better weight than this. So I can't get to shore because it's too rocky, right? So I can't get my boat up in, but I was able to get my boat up into the sand and like beach it. I just like drive it up into I had her in the net, and I just like trolling motor up into the thinny. And then I angled the back better, and I power pulled down, so I'm able to like hold better. The boat's a lot less rocky. And I get down in the cockpit, I'm able to get down real low and get a much better reading. And that's when it locked in at that 9.3. And so I got all the, length and weight dimensions. And that was pretty much it. I didn't even, she just went, I will put her right back, because I don't want to harm one like that. You know what I mean? I want to make sure she gets back healthy. And so she swam off strong, and it was, all in like a blink of an eye.
Dude.
It seems like it went so fast. Dude,
that is like, that's my version of a bedtime story, dude. I want to listen to that. I want to put that on repeat every time I go to bed, just like fall asleep with a smile on my face.
That's crazy.
Pretty sick, dude.
That.
This is the fish that you're referring to, right? This one here?
Yes, that's her. Yep, that's her.
All right.
That is her.
Yeah. So this was posted on June 23rd. Is that the actual day that you caught it, or did you catch it in that?
I caught her
around that time.
I caught her a little bit before then. Yeah. There's usually a time delay with my social stuff, but just for obvious reasons. But that one, just a few days. That one was pretty close though, because it was later in season, so it was Yeah, you probably didn't want to sit on that one for too long without I can sit on some of them, but I couldn't sit on that one. Yeah, that one. I don't blame you. That's crazy, man. Cool. What an interesting experience. I mean, especially like you said, I mean, for somebody who goes after it so hard, to finally find that one. It's crazy how it's crazy how profound of an impact something like that can have on you when, I mean, it's really just a bite from an animal, right? I mean, it's one of thousands and thousands and thousands of these fish that we catch.
and that one for
Yeah.
some reason it just matters.
one.
And yeah, it's crazy. I mean, there's
Big old
almost
fat
It is
one,
fun.
dude.
I mean,
Big old Bertha.
psychiatrists
Yeah.
would have a field day with trying to explain why that even matters
Yeah.
at all, you know, but
Why-
it does.
why we
I
care
mean,
so much. Yeah.
it matters.
Cool.
So yeah, pretty cool experience. And I mean, what a time to be able to do that too. And to be able to, I
Yeah.
mean, to live in a time when you could have that experience and then post it for other
Mhm.
people to share in your joy of it. I mean, that's pretty cool too. So
It is,
So-
man.
I
It
mean,
really is. Yeah.
to take pictures of it, to be able to weigh it, to be able to
Yeah.
FaceTime your wife so that you have somebody to talk to. Because I'm
Yeah.
sure
We
you
try to
would've found-
FaceTime our wives, and they don't
give a
care.
shit, dude. They don't care. But I mean, that could be because we're not catching 9-pounders. I mean, that could be the difference.
Maybe that's the difference,
I do.
guess.
I
don't
do
know.
have my wife
Yeah.
trained to, like, she knows if it's a successful
Pretend.
day. If she's like, "Would you catch any 20s today?" And I'm like, "No." She's
Yeah.
like, "Wow, okay, that sucked." Yeah,
Yeah, that's like the mark,
kinda-
right? Yeah.
she's like, "You can do better." No,
Come on, Josh.
so my big I'm curious to hear your response on this. So
Yeah.
I would say Chris and I are trophy hunters in our own, world that we're in.
Yeah.
I fish a decent amount of tournaments, but
It's
I
unbelievable. It's unbelievable the absolute alpha male energy that you have to even be able to even with a straight face be like, we're also trophy bass fishers.
well,
We
I mean,
are
in our
also-
defense,
what an
we
insane thing to do.
yeah.
This is the
well,
same guy that called out Larry Dahlberg on our podcast, where at the time we thought literally there were 50 people listening to this podcast. We found out later that we have
Yeah.
a lot of listeners, but we thought there were 50 guys
That's awesome.
listening to this. And
Yeah.
he dimes out Larry Dahlberg. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is the same thing. A guy just tells a 9-pound smallmouth story, and you're like, we're also trophy bass fishermen with a straight face.
Well,
everybody,
no,
it's
go
in your
ahead,
realm,
Josh.
right? Yeah.
it's
Go ahead,
all
Josh.
relative, but so my thing is, like, we've learned in our fisheries, like, when we're really focusing on catching trophies as opposed to just going fishing. I think there's a very big distinction
Yeah.
there between, like, hey, I'm just going to go out and fish and hope I catch a big one, and I'm going out to catch big fish. And obviously
Yeah.
we fish mostly rivers, so it's a little bit different of a mentality not a mentality, it's just a different, like, set of techniques that we implement. What would you say, like, is the most important thing? Is it the time of year you go out? Is it location? Is it the type of presentations that you get, that you use? What are, like, and do you agree with that? Do you agree that, like, trophy fishing is its own sort of skill set?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely a different set of skill set. It's a different, it's a different approach to the fishery and the time on the water. Regardless of what fishery it might be, it's a different approach to things. Like you mentioned, you might be looking for, less bites. So you might step away from the areas that you can catch a bunch in order to put yourself in what you might think might be your best chance at tangling with the biggest fish in the pond, right? I would think that, of those elements that you mentioned, I would say it's kind of a combination of many things. Being on the right fishery obviously is a huge aspect of that. Not everywhere grows fish of that caliber, right? Is that plays a huge part in, having more interactions and more chances. If you're on a huge body of water and it only has one fish over 6 pounds, versus you're on a huge body of water and it has 100 of them, you have more chances of crossing with, pass with that fish, or a fish of that size, I should say. Obviously having the right gear, having those experiences with those big fish helps a lot. If you have the more interactions that you have with them, the more time you have learned with how they're going to interact with you, like what you do the one time that you spook that big fish before you get a chance, or what you do that makes that fish turn around and bite. Those little details can help you be better prepared next time you come into connection with another one, right? I know a lot of guys that I fish with or have fished with that, they get a bite, they reel their bait in to check and see what's wrong with it if they miss the fish on the first hook set, right? they would have never had that chance to get bit a second and a third time by that fish, but knowing that fish might still be there looking at it, waiting for it to do something stupid before it comes and bites again and again. Those little things like that can go a long ways to helping you have more success with those bigger fish, right? Understanding just from time in the water, having the right presentations, the right baits that they react positively to, and being in the right places.
Are you a big forward-facing sonar guy?
Not to the extent that a lot of the touring pros are. I definitely do not live by it. Like I mentioned before, I had it turned off when I caught that big one. I have it and I utilize it, but I utilize it in the way of helping me understand my positioning to the structure a lot more than I do like, okay, I got to watch my bait fall on that fish's head and I'm going to make sure he chases it. I do a lot less of that and a lot more of like, okay, that point is, or this piece of structure is, 75 feet that way. It makes you more efficient, right? Instead of being like, okay, the waypoint's there, where's that tree, and trying to find it, you're like, okay, it's right there, I'm going to cast at it, and then I'll hit spot lock and I'm not watching it. You're just fishing the area efficiently. It's absolutely a great tool to learn the water really quickly and learn, fishery a lot faster. But I don't want it to consume why I'm out there. I don't want it to be the reason that I'm out there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
I feel like it's such an effective tool to leverage that, like, for a guy like you who is so focused on finding those few really, outstanding fish, to just completely ignore the utility of that tool, I think would be somewhat a little bit foolish, probably.
Yeah.
And I think it sounds like you've kind of struck a middle ground, because it also would be quite lame to be out there all day getting tossed around by waves and staring at a computer screen. You might get motion sickness. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it just, a lot of it for me, as you guys probably can agree, the reason we got into fishing is being on the water, enjoying the places that you get to see and fish, and that to me is a huge element of it. I'm a photographer, a very visual guy. I love to see things and I love the beauty of these places. So I don't want to be looking at a screen. We do that enough at home on a computer and a phone, so when I'm out there, I'd rather be looking at the water and stuff like that.
Yeah. The idea that electronics are, they would spook fish, which, if there's one thing I think all big fish have in common, no matter where they're at, is they are smarter than the smaller ones. Like, and there's a reason why they're harder to catch. They have lived longer, so they sort of learned like, hey, like this means danger. Whereas like you can clearly tell these 14, 15-inch fish haven't learned that yet. And being stealthy in a river for us is like, I think that's one of the number one mistakes that guys make, that even that fish a lot, they just don't understand that you can crash into a spot and catch, the like sort of 80 percentile fish, if you really want that, like, or 50 percentile, but if you really want the like top tier alpha fish in an area, like you have to really work on not like revealing yourself. And in a place like the Great Lakes, like how much does that play into it? Even when they're like deep, does that, do you feel like that's a differentiator for you?
Totally. Yeah. I think they're such visual fish and visual creatures, as you guys know, so if you do something wrong with a presentation, right? If you cast short or you cast, your bait to water too hard right over their head, they're very aware of that stuff. And the more when you see them in deeper water and you can tell, when they react to different things very quickly, I think if your boat isn't positioned properly, if you're not casting properly, that stuff absolutely comes into play. Like you have to be on your game. You're not just going to stumble into a 7 and she's going to make a mistake just with you 20 feet away flailing at her. Because like you said, she's had that experience, right? I used to joke that they could tell the difference between the brands of spinnerbaits and tubes that they got thrown at them, because they've lived 15 years and they've seen all these baits come flying by their head over different periods of time. And I think they learn to associate those bad experiences with fishermen, right? And they learn to associate our boat and the sounds that, and so they know, like, they might not think like, oh, it's predator, but they might be like, last time that happened, this happened, and I don't want to do that, so they know to get out of there. It's just an animal instinct, like you talked about. It's just an animal, still has its experiences, its life that it's lived, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to think about that too. Do you feel like those fish are pressured at all, or do they, like, I mean, I guess there's just so many smallmouth in the Great Lakes that,
And they're so big, and there's so few bass fishermen. I mean,
yeah, like,
as
are those
compared to
fish?
like when you think about like Dale Hollow, for instance, or you
Mhm,
think about
mhm.
like Lake Cumberland, or another like reservoir, like a notable size. Like these are big lakes
Yeah.
too, but like think about the percentage and the amount of people that are out there bass fishing, targeting smallmouth, fishing for them every single day. It's a fraction of a fraction out there
Mhm.
seeing these fish on the Great Lakes. I mean, which is great for you. I mean, you're first of all, they're long
Yeah.
runs. They're in remote areas, and I mean, do you feel like have you seen any changes in the amount of pressure that your fish have faced since, like, say, COVID, for instance?
Yeah, that's a great question. There absolutely has been an increase. I think in the past, probably say 6, 8 years, there's been a big interest in smallmouth in general. The uptick in Great Lakes smallmouth has really grown. A lot of people are very interested in learning how to do it, and it seems like
Yeah.
we absolutely see more people and more numbers. For example, there's this portion of Lake Huron, not too far from where I live, is Saginaw Bay, and that has become a kind of a regular stop on several national tournament scales now.
Yeah.
We have almost one or two a year, whereas when I first learned this place and started fishing it, there was nobody out there. You know what I mean? Like, those fish hadn't
Right.
seen anybody. Whereas now, there's 150 boat tournament, 200 boat tournament, all twice a season, and then you have all of the regular small tournaments that are out there now. So it's a huge increase in pressure compared to what it once was, say, even 6 years ago. In just that
Yeah.
few years,
Hmm,
it's been
What
that's
role
a
crazy.
vast change, in the reaction
what
that
role
fish.
do you think, like, social media I mean, just from a outsider perspective, because, I mean,
Yeah.
but I see the content that you guys put out, Great Lakes guys, and
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
crazy. I mean, it's like I mean, for guys that are into, like, bass fishing, it looks to me
Hmm.
like you're bass fishing in the Caribbean. I mean, that it's just
Yeah.
the most beautiful water that you've ever seen, gigantic
Yeah.
smallmouth. It
Yeah.
looks incredible. I mean, do you
Yeah.
think that social media has had a huge influence on the amount of pressure that you guys are seeing, or is it more the attention from the tournament trails, or what do you attribute that to, I guess?
Totally. No, totally. I think it's absolutely a combination, combination of both, but I think social media is 100%, a double-edged sword. It's one of those things that for someone within the industry, it can be valuable for your career, and it can be fun to build a community like you guys have done with
No
the
doubt.
Smallie games, and connecting with other people that love it and share it. Right. I've met some of my best friends through social media that share a love for fishing, but at the same time, there are individuals, and there's lots of people that don't realize the impacts that them sharing this or them sharing that and tagging the location, or the impacts that can have on a place. And we've all been guilty of it. I used to do it when I was younger. I would tag here or tag there, and I didn't think
Mhm.
twice about it. Now, but you see firsthand how many people are interested in chasing down a bite that they can chase down because someone tagged the location and showed the background, and they don't want to have to go hunt for that. And so it very much so has played an impact into that, as far as the increase in pressure, the changing in the fisheries, and just the overall appeal. Like you said, it looks awesome because we're very fortunate.
I mean, it
We're
is.
very,
Yeah.
the water's blue. Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. There's wonderful places. There's beautiful places. And many of them have good numbers, like you mentioned. Some of them don't. Some of them have crazy numbers. And so that stuff is very appealing when you have fisheries that have, by your house, that might not be very good, and you're like, I want to go catch 50 bass. I don't want to have to work all day to catch 5. And so there's very much so the draw of that, that has changed and evolved this stuff. And and then you have people that are showing what those places are capable of, and that is very inspiring. I talked to a dude one time at a ramp that saw, he was from Oklahoma, okay, and he saw somebody had tagged or posted a photo from up in a certain area, and he knew where it was because he had fished there. And he drove 16 hours overnight to come up and fish for the weekend or for like a week. And like, that's just an example. Like, he literally left the next day because he saw this dude was catching them and he knew they were there. So he's like, I'm going to go. So he drove, 16, 18 hours to go fish this. I'm like, that's just a good example of the extent that, that people will go if they know they're there or they know where they find them, having hunt for them, and it's, so yeah, it definitely has its elements that.
Yeah, people will do that. It cracks me up every time that I talk to somebody that, because we talk about our home waters a lot, not because it's good, it's just because it's like where we're at, and it cracks me up. People will be like, "Dude, I'm gonna be like passing through Indy, I'm gonna hit up the White River." I'm like, "Bro, like that is not worth your stuff. Like, you don't understand. Like, we catch big fish out of these places because we like fished it our whole lives." And we like understand, we have little windows where it's like, oh, it's really good, but overall it's a really shitty fishery. But hey, they saw it on social media, so they're just like, hey, let's go hit it up.
Let's go try it.
Yeah, it's and we've done that too. I mean, Chris and I have planned trips to places, and we're like,
based on content.
This guy?
Yeah,
he's catching giant. He's posting giants, and we're like checking. Did he post today? Is it,
no doubt.
Are they catching him right
almost
now?
like a scout?
You got like a scout
on the ground.
Yeah.
I think it's good to like
you gotta make the most of your time.
Yeah, it's good to be vague. I think it's okay to give people a little bit of something to go on. Yeah, for sure. But to protect your the places that you value and you want to protect, like, from just hordes of people, because as you get more and more popular, like, I don't know how many followers you have a good amount of followers on Instagram. Like,
I just looked him up. He's got you got like 30,000 followers or something.
Yeah, like, dude, that's a lot of eyes on that. When you post, like, people are like, hey, like, this dude's like trying to figure out, what's in the background and stuff. It's probably harder to do in the Great Lakes because you're just like, it's blue.
People do it.
A lot of it is but still.
People do it. They'll snoop that stuff out, dude. You got some internet sleuths out there.
They'll something about it. Dude.
They'll see like a little
there's definitely a lot of that.
Or they'll see like a swimming
pool
or
on
a
shore.
house
There'll be
like
a tree.
a house with a weird shaped roof. They're like, oh my god.
Yeah, they're like, I know that rock. Exactly. You got to be careful with that stuff.
Load up the boat, boys.
I have just kind of made it's time to go. Yeah, I just kind of made a blanket, a background that I do, or a blanket treatment that I do with all my photos. Now that I share, that just because, like I said before, I don't want my sharing stuff to be impactful to one of the fisheries. You know what I mean? So I'd rather keep it as minimal as possible. I just feel like that's the responsible thing to do. I don't know if that's the right word, but
no, I mean, you got to think like, this is gonna sound like a bad analogy, but like, when 30,000 bass fishermen following you, that's a crazy amount of people. You got to think like Bill Dance, Bill Dance in like the 90s when he was like putting out his best, weekly TV shows or whatever. He probably had like 30,000 people tuning in on a once a week basis. You've got people that can check you out any moment that you post
anytime,
something. Anytime they can look at you, they can look at your profile, they can see what's going on with you, your family, where you're fishing at, what you're catching, all that kind of stuff. I think you're doing the absolute right thing by being careful about it, because it's like the analogy that I was thinking of is like McDonald's, right? So McDonald's has got this thing that they have to be really careful about what products they put on their menu, because they have so many stores and so many people that eat at McDonald's that if they choose to say put avocados on their menu, it could create major impacts downstream in the supply of avocados.
That's really interesting. That's a good,
So you're kind of like, I mean, you're not the biggest bass content guy out there for sure, but you're at that stage where it's like, you just have to be careful about it, because if you are too open with your content, like, you're going to create problems for the area that you're in. So I completely get it. I think you're doing the exact right thing, and thinking about it, not only for you, but for the fish and all that kind of stuff. And just, man, keep doing what you're doing. 'Cause I think it's super interesting, and not a lot of people have the amount of access that you have to, what we would consider to be, there's a few places out there. There's St. Lawrence, there's, upper Mississippi, there's, the great, portions of the Great Lakes that I think are just like the absolute destinations for people that love the smallmouth fish. So, not a lot of people have that amount of access that you have. And I think it's really cool and interesting. And yeah, man, keep doing what you're doing. And I do appreciate you coming on the podcast to talk to us about it, because it was super interesting. And you're the type of guy that I think if I had my full druthers, I'd talk to you for hours and hours. But in respect of your time, I think that we should probably get close to wrapping this puppy up. And I appreciate you, though.
Yep.
No problem. Thank you guys. This has been fun. It's always cool to talk to.
Yeah. Do you have anything?
Go ahead. I'm in no rush.
No. You want to share like your Instagram sort of thing so people can follow you?
Share your Instagram and any other like projects that you're working on and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. The Instagram would probably be the only thing. That's pretty much where I do share anything that I do. It's just my first and last name. So Cobi, it's kind of hard to spell. Cobi.Pellerito. And that's just at Cobi.Pellerito, and that's me on Instagram. If you type it in COBI, it'll come up. You'll see the dude, long arm and a big smallmouth. You'll be able to spot me out of the crowd there. So,
I mean, and long arming a 9-pound smallmouth. Come on, man. Save some for the rest of us, brother. What are you doing?
I know. I love the Facebook comments. And because Megabass Facebook people just tear it apart. I don't care because it's whatever, but it's funny, man. People get so worked up about that stuff, dude. They get so mad.
It's so ridiculous, man. I mean, it's crazy.
It
I mean, it's a 9-pounder. I don't know what you want from this guy. Leave him alone. I don't know.
I know. I know. It's just, you can't please everybody, I guess.
No, you can't. Well, we appreciate you, man. Thanks a lot. And we always sign off the podcast with Free the Fighter. So Free the Fighter.
Free the Fighter. Absolutely. Free the Fighter.
Right.
I like it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Cobi.
I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Hey, man, if you don't mind staying on for a second, man, I want to chat with you. So
yeah, let's do it.
All right. Thanks.